An iceberg has only a little bit above the water. Most of the iceberg is below the water, and that's what makes the water so treacherous when there's icebergs. Illness, to me, is a lot like an iceberg. When somebody's sick, whether it's a chronic, a long-term illness, or they're really in a bad stretch, it's a little bit like the tip of the iceberg, because what we see is maybe just a little bit of what's going on in their body. But underneath the waters, there's a whole world of emotions and fears and hopes and prayers and laments. Today, the gospel writer Mark, with these two stories of these healings, takes us below the surface, takes us to the emotional underbelly of illness. In fact, almost 5% of Mark's gospel is just in these two stories. That's how much Mark slows down and wants to let us know what's going on and really invite us in. And I think Mark invites us in not so much that we would feel sympathy for these people, although that we do, but to recognize where we are in these stories. Below the surface of these illnesses is a level of desperation. Again, below the surface is a level of profound anxiety and fear. And it causes this leader of the synagogue who previously Jesus has gotten in trouble with all the synagogue leaders. But this synagogue leader, he doesn't care anymore because his daughter is ill to the point of death. And there's nothing that a parent won't do for their child's health. Likewise, this woman who's been suffering for so many years, and Mark lets us know that financially her resources are depleted. For those of you that don't know this, the fact that she's bleeding means that she would have been ritually unclean, not able to go to temple for years. In fact, if she touched another human, they were ritually unclean. She was a total outcast, an outsider. And so she says, if I can just but touch him. Again, there's a level of not just frustration, but again, sort of desperation in every one of these people as they interact with Jesus today. We know this too in our lives. Although we have much more advanced medical technology, I think we've all lived in that space, that bubble where we go to the doctor and maybe we bring something up, or they say, hey, we were looking over your test results and there's something that's strange. And then you have to go through this seemingly endless series of specialists and tests and waiting and tests and waiting and medical bills that keep coming. And we find ourselves that line there where the woman said she had spent all she had and she was no better. And we know this even with all of our technology today. And that feeling of just such helplessness when somebody that we love, somebody in our family is dying of a disease, and it's just like there's nothing we can do about it. Again, we know where these people, we know where Jairus is, we know where this woman is in the crowd. But it's not just that desperation. There's something else that happens, and that is that we begin as humans to feel shame. We begin to feel guilt that eventually becomes internalized as shame, that somehow being sick is our fault. So many times as a pastor, I know that people don't want me to come and visit because they feel like they're a mess. They don't want me to see them in this condition. And then finally when I get there, how many times have I heard out of somebody's mouth, Pastor, what have I done to deserve this? And the simple answer, of course, is nothing. There's no direct correlation with anything they did and what happened. Like, we know so much now about genetics, about epigenetics, about randomness in life, about all sorts of factors. Yet when we get sick, we can't help feel that there's something that's wrong with us. And this is for physical illnesses. If it's a mental illness, the shame is compounded. And again, we just internalize that somehow we've done something wrong. This is what this woman today, she has so internalized. This is why she will not go face to face to Jesus. She doesn't even want Jesus to know that she has touched him. She just wants to touch his prayer tassel because she knows if he knows that he's touched her, he now is ritually unclean. That's how shameful her position is. Again, there's a way in which guilt and shame, in spite of our modern technology, do not leave us, especially in the wee hours of the morning as we're reflecting on what's going on in our lives and once again cannot fall asleep. We also find, though, that it's not simply our relationship with God or ourselves, but it's our relationship with others that is so profoundly changed by disease and illness. You know, the dad today is sort of willing to risk all of his social relations. He's willing to let people laugh at him. By the end of the story, there's so many people that have left him. Well, what happens again is that we go on this trail and we go down, search after cure, after possibility, and people start to wonder what we're doing. Or simply the illness that we have, we worry that it's contagious, or we're more susceptible to things now, or we don't like how we look, and again, we recoil, we pull back from social interaction, and we find ourselves alone. Again, the tip of the iceberg is the physical illness, but underneath in those waters, there's a whole maelstrom. There's a whole treacherous waters of all that's going on in our heart and in our soul when we and the ones we love are sick. But again, Mark doesn't simply write this that we would have sympathy or even identify with them. Mark wants to let us know Jesus' empathy for us when we are sick, when those in our loved ones are sick. This story is fundamentally about Jesus and what he's doing. And Jesus has such compassion. Such compassion. This person of the synagogue leaders, all they've done is harass Jesus. Yet when they come to him and he hears this man cry about his daughter, he says, okay, let's do this. And then when he feels the power go out of him, he could have at this point just kept on going, but he knows there's a story, there's a person who's hurting, and he knows that the physical is just the tip of the iceberg. He knows there's something else that's going on, and so he wants to heal this person totally. And so he says, who touched me? He slows down for her. And then she comes forth and she begins to, it just all comes out in a mess of tears. And then Jesus looks at her and he calls her his daughter. And in this world where she's been ostracized by her family, by her friends, where she has nothing, Jesus lets her know that she is part of God's family. That she's okay again to love and to have as part of this community. He restores her. And then when the people come and they say, hey, the daughter is dead. At this point, Jesus is doubling down. The fact that he touched this woman, he's already ritually unclean, but now he's going to touch a dead body. Again, this would mean that he would not be able to go to temple. He'd have to go through the whole purification rites. But Jesus isn't afraid. He's not afraid of the grief. He's not afraid of the sadness that is just pouring out of the Father. He looks at the Father and he sees a person in total shock, unable to process, unable to feel. And Jesus isn't afraid of that. And Jesus goes in and he takes this woman, he takes this little girl, and he just holds her hand. And Mark wants to let us know that there's a softness to Jesus. And so Mark switches back to Aramaic. The whole conversation's been in Aramaic. But Mark wants to let us know that Jesus speaks to her in their native language. And he says, child, awake. And after he does this, he doesn't want them to have a spectacle. He says, don't tell anybody. This wasn't for the crowds. This was for you and your daughter. And give her something to eat. Love on her, as they say. Again, Jesus here is not afraid, not recoiling from the illness, but he is able, with his power and with his compassion, to move towards it. And so this is the Jesus who then calls forth for faith. And he tells the man, believe, trust, do not be afraid. And this is a call to us when we are in acute or chronic illness, to believe and to trust. And I have seen again as a pastor the power of faith. The power where people believe. You can't barely tell the difference in their desperation and their faith, but they will not give up on their child and their child's addiction. They will not give up on the treatment. They will go for one more round. They'll go for one more round because they want to see their granddaughter's birth. They want to see their grandchild's wedding. They will do it. They have this tenacity, this faith that manifests itself in courage to look at illness and death and say, I am not afraid. I trust in the Lord, my Redeemer. There is such power in this faith, and there is this awesome way in which faith then begins to transform our hearts. And even though we can't quite figure out what or if we've done wrong or what others have done wrong, we finally commend ourselves and say, God, in Jesus Christ, your love is greater than my sickness. Your love is greater than my sin. And into your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit. I lay my burdens down at your cross. And we discover then that faith is uniting us. And we discover at those times a community, a cloud of witnesses who are praying that we knew existed, but frankly we didn't up until that crucible in our lives. Yes, indeed, there is a power to faith. And Mark lets Jesus summon us to that faith today. But the dad of this 12-year-old girl, whom I identify with, at some point, something snaps. And really, the second half of the story, he doesn't do anything else. He's immobilized. The news of his daughter's death, he's got nothing left to give anymore. Again, he doesn't say anything. He can't make a decision anymore. And we've all been there where we were doing fine. We were believing, we were praying, things were going. And then, like some news, some doctor's visit, something just hit us and we no longer had it. We're just numb. Just totally numb and incapable of taking another step forward. But here we see that Jesus doesn't just call for faith. Jesus is the faithful one. Again, Jesus is the faithful one. And so Jesus sees this man who's now just placid, whose eyes have no life in them. And Jesus just puts that man on his shoulders, and he's going to carry that man. This is who Jesus Christ is. There was a woman this week who told me that at one point in life they just were crying out, and they just said too many tears, and finally they said to God, I can't cry anymore. It's been years, I just can't do this. Truly at their breaking point, they had nothing left to give. And they said in that prayer, they felt like there was something like almost like sweet honey that just came over them, and they felt anointed in their prayers. At some point in our journey, we realize that our faith is not enough, but that Jesus Christ is the faithful one, and that he will carry us even when we can no longer move forward. This is the Jesus that we meet in the Gospel of Mark. This is the Jesus that we meet in life. The Jesus who is not afraid of the deep waters, who's not afraid of where demons dwell, who's not afraid of cancer diagnoses, who's not even afraid of death itself. Indeed, he will choose out of his compassion to go to the cross where he will lay down his life, that he might heal you and bring salvation to you. Amen.